Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to talk about keybinds, how to set them up, how to learn new ones, and some tips for optimizing your setup. If there's one thing that makes WoW tough to learn, it's the keybinds. Every class has around 20 or 30 abilities that need to be bound. Then you factor in some consumables, a trinket, and specific macros, and you're quickly swamped. It's an absolutely awesome feeling though to have full control of your character, being able to select from tons of different abilities and use them in an instant. In my opinion, that's what defines MMO combat, having a large toolkit of rotational and situational abilities and knowing what to use at the right time. Before you start trying to train your cat to start helping you with your raid fights, allow me to help you construct a system that will master your keybinds. I'll give you some advice as to how you should think about key mapping, a path to improve your keybind use, and some helpful tricks and add-ons that I use to optimize my key layout. There's one simple rule that you have to follow if you want to improve your keybind use. Every ability, item, or anything else that you use during combat has to have a keybind. I don't expect you to use all of them right away, but you have to set them up. Don't let yourself get lazy and turn into a clicker every time you need to use an ability. As trivial as it may seem, putting everything into a keybind is the first step to actually using them. Before I start, don't forget the new Quick Keybind mode that was released in the Shadowlands pre-patch. Go to Keybinds and then click Quick Keybind mode in the bottom, and it will open a screen where you can mouse over and bind spells easily. This only works for spells if you're using the normal Blizzard bars, but it's a great way to change your keybinds quickly. Let's look at what keys are available to us. Obviously, we can use whatever keys we want, but we can limit them to a range so that the possibilities aren't endless. I'm going to be assuming you're using a QWERTY key layout in the video. The concepts will apply to any key layout, but the examples just might not make much sense. Our keys should always be able to easily be pressed with our left hand during combat. This includes 1 through 5, Q through T, A through G, and Z through B. Depending on your keyboard layout and hand flexibility, you may also have more keybinds available to you as well. F1 through F4, tilde, and mouse buttons are all great options as well. Along with these keys, we have modifiers, Control, Shift, and Alt. Personally, I only like using Control and Shift, but use Alt or anything else if it works for you. You're going to have to use modifiers. Don't assume you can get away with only individual key presses. A no modifier setup might be possible if you have an MMO mouse and a spec with not many keybinds, but for most of you, start getting used to using Control or Shift or Alt or something at least. Now, what goes where? If you're just creating a fresh layout or simply doing a big redesign and lacking some inspiration, the way you should be thinking about keybinds is in groupings. There are many different types of abilities, but they can be broken down pretty easily into different categories based off of their use. First is rotational abilities. These should generally be close to your main movement keys. These are the most important abilities to have good keybinds for, both for your gameplay and your hand health, since you're going to be pressing them over and over and over. It's important to consider which of these abilities you can use while you're moving. For example, 2 might seem like it's a really good key to bind to a rotational ability to, however, it's likely that you can't move forward and press 2 at the same time easily, so you shouldn't bind 2 to something that you need to cast while moving forward often if you can help it. If you have extra mouse buttons, rotational spells that you can use while moving are great for these. While you're just setting up and learning your character, constantly evaluate how the rotational abilities feel. Most other abilities you can get away with a poor or weird keybind if you have enough practice, but any rotational abilities should feel good and not conflict with any buttons that need to be pressed with them. Next is the reactional situational abilities. These are not pressed as often, but when they need to be pressed quickly. Interrupts, health potions, personal defensives, or movement abilities commonly fall into this category. These should be placed in any available close binds after the rotational abilities are worked in. It's important to access these quickly and efficiently in combat. Having a reactionary ability that's hard to press can be a nightmare. It can lead to mistakes where you think you're playing poorly, but really it's at fault of a poor keybind. Since you're going to have a lot of these, it might be a good idea to use a modifier to bind similar things to the same bind. For example, using R for health potion and then Control R for health stone. Then we have our cooldowns. By now, most of our close available keybinds are going to be taken up, so we're going to have to start reaching to the outer edges or using our shift control modifiers. That's okay though, because we won't be pressing these abilities often, and the timing of them will generally be pre-planned. Similar to the advice I gave on rotational abilities, try to factor in what you're going to be using immediately after a cooldown press, especially if it's not on the GCD. For example, Mistweaver uses Thunder Focus T to empower their next ability, so I have my T on R with the main abilities I'm empowering on 1 through 3, so that I can press them with different fingers. A non-GCD cooldown where you need to be pressing a spell immediately is a great candidate for a mouse button as well. Then last is our non-reactional situational abilities, or you can just simplify and say everything else. Stuff that isn't in your rotation, doesn't need to be pressed immediately on reaction, and doesn't specifically combine with any other abilities. Remember, you want to have everything keybound, so even if you don't use a talent often or ever, or maybe if an ability is only useful in one dungeon, you should still keybind it. For a lot of these, you'll have to use modifiers since your good keys are taken up, but that's okay because you're not pressing them often and quickly anyway. If you're having keybind problems, make sure you move all of this stuff off of good keybinds to get the important stuff front and center. One rule I try and follow, considering I play multiple classes, is to have similar keybinds in the same spots across multiple characters. If you only play one character, then it isn't too big of an issue for you, but managing keybinds for multiple characters can be difficult. For example, if you have your Dispel on the same button press across every character, or even your low cooldown hot or direct heals. Maybe you want to use F for execute or finisher abilities so that you can pay respects. I also want to put my trinket on use on the same slot of every character, even though they might be very different things. For example, one character's trinket might just be a cooldown that you're comboing with abilities, but another might be a reactionary defensive. I found it just too difficult to have different trinket binds across multiple characters, even if it might be technically better. There are a few other binds that you need to have available as well. These are direct WoW functions that will be useful during combat. Examples may include set current target to focus and extra action button, or the button that appears when you grab an item or need to interact with something. It may be a good idea to bind a world marker and a target marker to a keybind as well, especially if you raid lead or group lead, since although they might not be commonly pressed, all of these abilities will need to be done in combat. So now that you have everything bound, how do you actually go about mastering your keybinds? With this one crazy trick that MMO Mice manufacturers don't want you to know about, learn all 37 of your keybinds instantly. I wish I had one for you. There isn't really a secret, you just need to master them one at a time. I will give you one piece of advice though that I use to help learn keybinds and should help you as well. Generally with action bars, in order to make a clean UI, they're kept very small and moved to the sides of the screen. Some action bars don't even show the keybind they are bound to, and other people play with many action bars hidden completely. This is fine if you have all of your binds mastered, but it can make it very hard to see them if you haven't yet. If there are certain abilities or keys that you're struggling with, don't hide them. Make them large and in charge. Big icons that are near the middle of your screen with the keybind that they are bound to written on it as well. You can do this in many different ways. If you have a bar add-on like Dominoes or Bartender, you can simply make a keybinds I'm working on bar and then make them more center and bigger in the middle of your screen. You can also just make a weak aura for them as well, or simply just write the keybind in a large font on your current weak auras if you already have one. It will be a consistent reminder for you while you play what the keybind is and that you should be using it. Don't let yourself click the abilities you're working on. Force yourself to always use that keybind for those couple abilities. Eventually, after a few hours of gameplay, you'll get used to using them, and then you can move them out of the middle of the screen back into their normal place again. Repeat with all of your abilities that you're struggling using until you've mastered all of them. Muscle memory is amazing, and once you get used to them, you're set for a very long time. That's the system. It's that simple. Bind your keys, structured practice and reminders, and then repeat. Keep it up and you'll completely master your character. You'll be topping the meters while your mouse hand is completely free to select enemies precisely and adjust your camera, of course. What else would you use it for? Everyone gets to a point, though, where they feel like they can't add any more keybinds. I want to spend the rest of the video sharing some tips for managing your keybinds and fitting in all of your abilities smoothly. The first obvious topic is MMO mice and keyboards with additional macro buttons. I didn't mention them in the first section, and it's because not everybody has one or wants to use one. It would be a pretty lame video if I just said, well, just get an MMO mouse. That being said, MMO mice are a good option if you want to slot in some additional keybinds easily. There really isn't a lot to say about them. They function similarly to a keyboard button, and you learn them the exact same way. The only difference to mention is that they are on your mouse hand instead of your keyboard hand. This means it'll be easier to press with movement or another keybind ability, but maybe slightly harder to press while you're also trying to turn your camera or click on a mob. If I had to recommend a mouse, it would be the Corsair Scimitar. I use it and it's great, although I haven't tried many other options, so there could be better fits out there for you. If you're looking for a cheaper option or want to try out something else, the Logitech G600 will save you 20 or 25 bucks depending on where you get it. Don't forget that even if you aren't using an MMO mouse, you probably have a few binds you can use from it anyway. Along with the extra mouse button or two, almost every mouse is going to have a scroll wheel, which you can use for 2 or 3 different buttons. Scroll wheel up and down can be bound to things, as well as the button press if you have it available. Next is OPie. OPie is a great add-on that allows you to bind multiple abilities, items, macros, or anything else to one button. When you press that button, it opens a radial menu that you can drag the mouse in a direction to activate one of the abilities. This is not ideal for combat abilities. I would highly recommend against putting anything important like rotational abilities or situational things on the OPie wheels. What you can do, however, is put groupings of rarely used or maybe out of combat abilities on wheels to save keybinds. For example, if you have multiple damage potions for different scenarios, say one for single target and one for AoE, you can bind both to an OPie wheel. Healer potions as well. I have my mana and replenishment potions bound to this wheel, as well as my Lightfoot potions. It's great for collectibles like battle pets, toys, and mounts too. Even if they're not used in combat, it still allows you access to many of your favorite mounts quickly without using the in-game menu. If you are a raid or dungeon leader, again, or just have a big mouth and you like to tell people what to do, you can bind multiple target markers or world markers to an OPie wheel. Regardless of what you use it for, it's a great add-on, and it's one of the things that gets asked most about on my streams and videos. Macros are important to discuss in this section as well. You can use macros to change a keybind based off of the current talent you're using. For example, druids may want to make a macro that changes from incapacitating roar, typhoon, and maim depending on which affinity they're in. You can also set up a macro that does a different thing depending on what target you have selected. For example, on my shaman, I have purge bound to the same button as dispel, so that if I'm moused over or selecting an ally, it will use my dispel, but if I have an enemy selected, it will purge instead. I'm not going to go in depth discussing how to set up all of these macros, but I have a video for that. Check the link in the description if you want information on some of the common macros that I use in-game. There are also a few more subjective ways to either improve keybinds or just make things more comfortable. I'm pretty certain that everything previous to now is a straight improvement for most of you, however the next few tips are mainly just for something to try if you think you'd like it. One thing I do that I'm not sure how popular it is actually using my knuckle on my pinky to press the control key. This is an old habit from StarCraft Brood War where you often needed to press control and numbers at the same time very quickly to bind control groups of units. This allows me really good, quick flexibility with all of my control modifiers, and that I can easily press things like Control 5 or Control T, which would otherwise be slower and strain your pinky. Some people might find Control annoying to use as a modifier, but for me it's been extremely natural and easy to bind it to any hotkey that I already use. It's been discussed to death whether or not you should unbind backpedal or not. The main reasoning for this is that it's almost never efficient to go backwards, and you should always be quarter turning your camera and strafing if you need to move in that direction because it's faster. While it is true that you should rip out many of the default Blizzard binds from the left side of the keyboard, like Unsheath Weapon or Open Control Panel, I think it's pretty contentious and unintuitive for most people to remove backpedal. I actually do use it, probably a bit too much, but if you want to unbind it, then it does free up one additional keybind. I don't think it's super important for the scope of this video, so I don't want to devote too much time into it. If you're trying to free up more keyboard space, especially if you PvP often, where movement efficiency actually matters a whole lot more, you can try unbinding your back pedal so that your only movement keys are forward and then left and right strafe. On the topic of movement binds, I've heard many players changing their other movement keys as well. You can rebind WASD to ESDF to improve your home row and move it over one, to allow more keybind use, since with WASD you're running into the left side of the keyboard. This is something that on paper seems like a good change, but similarly to unbind backpedal, it can be really weird and have bad crossover if you're playing other games. That covers everything about keybinding in World of Warcraft. I get asked a lot about keybinds, and it's one of the tougher parts for people who aren't used to playing the game. I covered most of the things that I wanted to talk about that I thought would be helpful, but if you think I missed something or have feedback, please do share it in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll be coming out with helpful, basic, and high-level content for World of Warcraft all the way through Shadowlands. Happy keying!